Oh, greetings once again from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, and also site for the latest installment in our virtual author series. Today, we'll be talking with a good friend of the Hall of Fame, frequent visitor, frequent participant in past author series programs here in Cooperstown. His name is Erik Sherman. We'll talk to Erik about his new book about the '86 Red Sox called Two Sides of Glory. Before we get to Erik, tell you a little bit more about him, we want to thank the Ford Motor Company. The programs that we offer virtually here from Cooperstown made possible through the generous support of the Ford Motor Company. So we do appreciate their giving us this chance with their financial support to offer these programs to you free of charge. Erik Sherman has really become a prolific author over just the last 10 years. It seems like he writes about a book a year, which is pretty amazing to me. He has written, as you can see in a moment, a number of books that are related to the New York Mets franchise. He has also done biographies of Steve Blass, Glenn Burke, Davey Johnson. A couple of years back, Erik was here with Mookie Wilson to talk about a book project. So we're very glad to greet once again Erik Sherman joining us here at the Hall of Fame virtually. Erik, it's great to see you. I know you're down in Westchester County, which is where I used to live many years ago. How are things going for you?
Well, things are going great, Bruce, and it is wonderful to be back and to be a part of the author lecture series. Once again, you do a great job with this, and it never gets old. It's always an honor.
Well, we thank you for the kind words. You can see some of the books that Erik has written in the past. A book that he did with Mookie Wilson. That was a lot of fun meeting Mookie. Did a book with Davey Johnson a few years ago. Kings of Queens was an especially well-received book that did very well in terms of selling lots of copies. Erik has also done a book with Art Shamsky about the 1969 New York Mets. So the Mets have been a recurring theme. But this year, Erik kind of turns the tables. He's going to look back at that 1986 season, but going to do it from the perspective of the Boston Red Sox. I think this is a fascinating angle, Erik. When writers and authors look for book topics, world championship teams, teams that have put together dynastic runs, these are common themes, common choices. It is rare that an author would select a team that lost a World Series. But I think it's a wonderful idea, especially with regard to this Red Sox team. It was a team full of big names and interesting personalities. When did you first come up with this idea to focus on the losing team in '86?
Well, really, I decided to do it soon after Kings of Queens was released. Because I got to talking with a friend of mine, Tim Neverett, who's now the Los Angeles Dodgers play-by-play man. He does radio and some TV out there. But at the time, he was one of the Red Sox broadcasters. And Tim and I played college baseball together at Emerson College, and we've been great friends ever since. And he said to me, you were in Boston with me during the mid-'80s. And we knew what a star-crossed, exciting team that was, what a magical season '86 was. Wouldn't it be great to get the perspective of the other side of the story? This was a team that had so many great stories throughout the year. And, starting on that cold, rainy night in April when Roger Clemens struck out 20 Seattle Mariners, in an evening where he was stuck in traffic and was scratched before his start, and he talked his way back in and had one of the great pitching nights a pitcher has ever had. But there were so many wonderful stories, and this was a team that it's easy to forget, but they were one strike away from elimination against the California Angels in a Game 5 of a best-of-7 series. And they staged a comeback for the ages. And then just 12 days later, of course, they were on the other side, one strike away from closing out the Mets to end the 68-year curse of the Bambino curse. The Mets turned the tables on them. So then they certainly lived the highest of highs and the lowest of lows within a very short period of time, Bruce. And I wanted to get to the bottom of how that affected the rest of their careers and the rest of their lives. And what I found out was just absolutely riveting and highly emotional interviews over 3 decades later.
Erik, you mentioned the 1986 ALCS, which in some ways gets drowned out by that year's World Series. But that was a phenomenally entertaining playoff series. The Angels are up 3-1. It looks like they're heading to their first ever World Series. And then Dave Henderson hits the dramatic home run against Donnie Moore, ties the game, sets the stage for, I believe it was a win in extra innings. And then they win the next 2 games. So very unlikely championship series win for them. And in some ways, the tables are turned on them when they head to the World Series. And they have the Mets not down 3-1, but 3-2. But let's talk about that series against the Angels and what the Red Sox were able to do there, because people forget about that. They all focus on the loss in the World Series, but to come back against a really good Angels team, quite an accomplishment.
Well, it really was. And, just to come back, they had a devastating defeat in Game 4 where Clemens was pitching, and I believe Schiraldi. He didn't get hit hard, but the Angels battled back and pulled it out after being down a couple of runs. And then you have Game 5. The Angels now up 3-1 at home, and you had police officers and security lining the dugouts and up and down the lines because they were expecting quite a few of the 65,000 in attendance that day to charge the field. I mean, it was that close. In fact, when Dave Henderson hit the home run to miraculously, put the Red Sox ahead, shortly after Donnie Baylor had hit a home run in that same inning, the Red Sox players could not see what was going on the field. All of them in that dugout did not see Dave Henderson's home run clear the fence. They were blocked by police officers. And the first 2 pitches to Henderson, he looked lost. First of all, he was injured, but he was out there because Tony Armas was injured too. Armas was the regular center fielder. So Henderson was badly hobbled and looked like an old man out there in those first two strikes against Donnie Moore. And then if you go back on YouTube and you watch the home run that he hit, I mean, it was low and outside. He really had to go down and almost golf an outside pitch and hit it over the left center field fence like he did. I mean, it was miraculous. And in his celebration, he injured his leg even more with the leap that he took and then twisted his ankle. And then he goes on and has a terrific World Series. Really a player that came out of nowhere. I don't even think he hit 200 during the regular season with the Red Sox following the trade that the Red Sox made with Seattle in August, I believe it was. Yeah. But boy, he got hot in the postseason, as did the other player the Red Sox obtained in that trade. Spike Owen had a terrific October as well.
Really interesting. Then it sets the stage for the 86 World Series. We all tend to focus on Game 6, but it was a pretty darn good series overall. Game 1 is a 1-0 pitcher's duel, Bruce Hurst against Ron Darling. Games 2, 3, and 4 a little more one-sided, but then games 5, 6, and 7 were all very close. Lots of twists and turns, lots of comebacks. So 4 out of the 7 games were exceptionally well contested.
Well, absolutely. The first game was decided on an error. The ball went through Tim Tuffle's legs, and that was the only run. That was a masterful pitcher's duel between Hurst and Ron Darling. And then game 2 was supposed to be the pitching duel of a lifetime. And it was Roger Clemens, who not only won the Cy Young Award that year, but also the Most Valuable Player Award, a very rare feat for a pitcher, going up against Dwight Gooden, who was the other phenomenal young pitcher in the game. Doc was only 21 years old. And it didn't work out to be the pitching duel of the century as they were billing it. Both pitchers were out of the game before the end of the 5th inning. Doc really didn't have it at all. And, I've interviewed most of the players from both teams, and quite frankly, the two teams had such emotional championship series that they were drained, especially the Mets. They tended to celebrate a lot more than the Red Sox did, especially after that Houston series, the plane trip back where the plane was torn up, and they were a different group of players than the New York Mets team, or than the Boston Red Sox team. The Mets, other than Mookie and Gary Carter and maybe one or two other guys, they were party animals, whereas the Red Sox were more stately and more professional, I suppose, off the field. But then you move into game 3, and Davey gave the Mets the day off when they were supposed to meet with the media. They didn't take batting practice or anything like that, and they came out and they took it to Oil Can, jumping out 4-0 in the first inning. And then Oil Can pitched great the rest of the game. I think he only gave up one more hit through 7, but the damage was done. And then the Mets were all over Al Nipper, which begs the question, if Tom Seaver were available in the series, he probably would have pitched in game 4. Going against the Mets, Hollywood could not have made up a better subplot than that.
Yeah.
So the Mets tie it. And as you alluded to, game 5 was a great game, a 4-2 narrow win behind Bruce Hurst. And then, of course, the epic game 6, and the close to epic game 7, where, I'm sure we'll talk more about game 6 in a moment, but game 7, the Red Sox had a 3-0 lead, and the Mets had, and believe me, they still to this day believe that game 6 absolutely took the fight out of them. But every Red Sox player that I talked to contends that they were ready for the Mets in game 7. The rainout helped. There was a rainout between game 6 and 7. They got their hottest pitcher, Bruce Hurst, to go for his 3rd win of the series. And then they jump out to that 3-0 lead. And it was just a really great Mets comeback. And then just a litany of second guessing why Clemens wasn't brought in relief. And the game 6 and 7, Bruce, were just a second guesser's dream.
Yeah. You hear that theme a lot. Such and such team was destined to win after winning the previous night. People talk about momentum. And I always try to remind people, no such thing as destiny in baseball. You can't predict it. Momentum, it can end as quickly as it starts. Sure, things look good for the Mets after winning game 6, but as you rightly point out, if the Mets were truly destined to win game 7 and the Red Sox were dead in the water, as the Mets said, then the Red Sox would not have scored 3 runs to take a lead early in that game. So a lot of times the historical facts don't bear out this team of destiny theme.
Right.
Let's talk about some of the players that you interviewed. You interviewed a number of the Red Sox from that team. I asked you to pick out 3 of the more interesting interviews, and one of the 3 was an interview with this man, the right fielder, highly underrated player, Dwight Evans. He had a very solid season in '86 for the Red Sox, 26 home runs, 97 RBIs, 97 walks.
Wow.
He was absolutely phenomenal in the World Series. He batted .308 with 2 home runs, 9 RBIs, an OPS of 1.015, all of that gets lost because the Red Sox did lose in such dramatic fashion. But in many ways, Dwight Evans was either their MVP in that series or close to it.
Well, yeah, and I think Dwight has been overshadowed. Certainly not just in that series, but like you alluded to, Bruce, his whole career. Probably because he was teammates with superstars and Hall of Famers like Jim Rice and Wade Boggs, of course, and before them, Carl Yastrzemski and Carlton Fisk. These are all Hall of Famers that I'm naming that he was teammates with. So, it's kind of like Gil Hodges syndrome in a way. When you play with so many Hall of Famers, your efforts and your talents and your accomplishments can get lost. And I think that's what happened with Dwight. You and I certainly remember the kind of defensive player that he was. Let alone the offensive numbers. Dwight Evans had arguably the best arm in baseball throughout his generation. He and probably Dave Parker. Now, I know that you're a big Roberto Clemente fan. Dwight came up, I believe, in 72 or so. So, that would have been at the very end of Clemente's career. Clemente, of course, had a rifle too. But my interview with Dwight, one of the reasons that I chose him as one of my three that we're going to talk about, I wanted to go into more about how Dwight Evans was a star player throughout his career, 22 big league seasons. And he did it after many times coming straight from a hospital. He had two sons and a daughter, and both of his sons had what's commonly known as elephant man's disease. So along with that, there were literally dozens of surgeries that his sons had to endure. So there were many times when Dwight Evans would leave one of his sons at the hospital and go straight to the ballpark, and he wouldn't talk about it. In fact, Jim Rice wasn't aware of the magnitude of Dwight's personal challenges until after their careers were over. And Jim Rice actually broke down and just felt horrible, for Dwight and everything he went through. And, Dwight and I, we had to put off this interview a couple of times because, one of his sons had brain cancer and wasn't doing well, and it was touch and go. And so we finally did meet. And then not long after the interview, not the son that had the brain for stage 4 cancer, but the other son, his condition quickly worsened and he died. And then not long after, the son that did have the stage 4, he died. So since our interview, Dwight's lost both of his sons. It's just so tragic. And he's such an exceptional human being. And, one of the stories that I absolutely love that he told me, one time he left, in fact, I have to preface this with the fact that I was in the ballpark when he did what I'm about to tell you. When I was 16 in 1982, I went to Ted Williams baseball camp in Massachusetts, and we were going to one Red Sox game as our field trip over that 2-week period. The game I went to, Dwight Evans hit 2 home runs. Now, before that game, his son said to him, Dad, would you hit a home run for me? And Dwight goes, well, I'll do my best. He's almost out the door, and the son goes, hey, Dad, would you hit me 2 home runs tonight? True story. And he goes out and he does it. It's right out of Pride of the Yankees with that famous Lou Gehrig scene. And Dwight did that for another child, not one of his sons, but another child that he went to visit as part of the Jimmy Fund, which the Red Sox have always been very, very involved with. So, these stories are just phenomenal. And His family has gotten through an awful lot. He's married to the same woman now for, I think, 51 years, which in baseball, under the best of circumstances with the baseball life, marriage isn't easy. But when you have everything that they went through, it just goes to show what an exceptional family the Evans family is, and just what a spectacular human being and ball player Dwight Evans was.
Erik, have you talked with him since his two sons passed away?
Yes, I have. We've stayed in touch, and after each of his sons passed away, I sent, of course, my sympathies, and we just spoke over the weekend actually, and he wants to help me promote this book, and so he'll be joining me on some interviews, and he was actually with one of his grandsons from one of his sons this weekend, who's looking at various universities right now. So he's just such a terrific family man, grandfather. I know the accolades are just flowing, but it's true. He's not just one of the finest ball players I've ever met, but one of the absolute top human beings that I've ever met.
For much of his career, he really struck me as a thoughtful player. He reworked his batting approach about midway through his career. He had been a very hot and cold hitter in his early years in the 1970s. And he did a lot of work on his hitting, a lot of work with Red Sox instructors, remade himself into a very consistently good hitter. And he just always seemed to be a thoughtful type player, offensively and defensively. And I guess that carries over to his interview style as well.
I mean, he always had these Hollywood looks, with that mustache, very, very much agreeing with him, a la Burt Reynolds. And I interviewed a number of these guys back in the 80s when I was working at a radio station in Boston. I also interned for the CBS affiliate in Boston, and the Red Sox had this PR guy, Dick Bresciani, who I actually dedicated the book to him, as well as Bill Buckner and a young Red Sox fan that I used to coach, who passed away tragically a few years ago. But yeah, he's just an exceptional person, who, even when I was 19, 20 years old, he treated me like I was Peter Gammons. And I mean that sincerely. He treated me like I was a veteran reporter, very easygoing. He gave great answers then, and he gave great answers 30 years later. And someone that treats others as he would like to be treated.
So when you first approached him about this book, he was receptive right from the start?
He was, yeah. Yeah, he absolutely was. But what I found out, I interviewed him over 2 days, just like I did with a number of these guys, like Roger Clemens was over a couple of days. Rich Gedman was over a couple of days. What I found out afterward from talking to Dwight was he didn't really talk, or he hadn't really talked much about 86, because it bothers him to this day that they didn't win. He played 22 seasons, a phenomenal career, and that was his best chance at winning the World Series. Of course, he was also in the 75 World Series against the Reds, where the Red Sox lost in 7 games. And it's interesting, those 2 World Series both had 2 of the great Game 6s ever, and had very somewhat similar Game 7s in that the Red Sox led 3-0 in both of those Game 7s, but ultimately came up short. So I think Dwight, it wasn't easy for him to talk about the 86 series, but he certainly did with me. And I just felt that we built up this trust and this comfort level. And so I think the interview with him was just extraordinary.
Final question on Dwight Evans. Is he fully retired today, or does he still stay active in some profession?
He works for the Red Sox in a limited capacity. I believe it's mostly at spring training. I know in the past he's worked with some of their minor league players. He would bounce back and forth between New England, so Boston, and when the AAA team was in Pawtucket. Now they've just moved to Worcester, and he has a house in Florida that's very close to where the Red Sox train.
Well, we'll move to one of the younger players on the 86 team. Evans was one of the vested veterans. Roger Clemens was only in his third season, but it was one of his best. You mentioned earlier, he won both the Cy Young and the MVP. I believe he won 24 games that year. Then in the World Series, he pitches poorly in Game 2, but then he's phenomenal in Game 6. Now, here's a very different personality from Dwight Evans. At times, Clemens had a combative relationship with the media. There's been some controversy attached to his name, but my understanding is that he was terrific with you. Tell us about this.
He really was. So the first time that I interviewed him, I was 20 years old, and it was a couple of weeks before he became the Rocket, which was a nickname coined by teammate Bruce Hurst. So it was 2 weeks before he struck out the 20 Seattle Mariners. And under the heading of something that would never happen today, I sat with him in the dugout to interview him with my little tape recorder about 2 hours before his scheduled start that afternoon against the Kansas City Royals. So fast forward, over 30 years later, he agreed to the interview, thanks in part to Joe Castiglione, the Red Sox play-by-play announcer who's in their Hall of Fame. He's been broadcasting Red Sox games since 1982, and he and Rocket have a very good rapport. So that really helped me a lot. But I scheduled the interview at Fenway. He was doing some charity work, and I met him in the exact spot in the Red Sox dugout where I had interviewed him back in 1986, and he thought that was really neat. And he could not have been a nicer, more cooperative guy. It was a day before a golf outing, or a golf trip, I should say. So he was on his way to Scotland to go golfing the next morning. And we didn't finish up. And he said, "Look, I think you have more questions. When I get back, I'll let you know, and we'll finish the interview over the phone." And so I'm thinking to myself, well, I got quite a bit at Fenway, and it's fine. But the day he landed, or the day after he landed from Scotland, which was like a couple of weeks later, I get a text from him, and he says, "If you're free tonight, we can talk." And he could not. He gave me as much time as I needed. I think we spoke for 7 or 8 hours. And he was just wonderful. Very insightful. There's some of the questions could have been viewed as a little touchy because of the PED allegations, and he could not have been more open about it. And he still contends that he did not use performance-enhancing drugs, but he gave me a lot of feedback on that, how it's affecting him, how it's affecting his family, how he beat the 6 counts of perjury in court. The credit that he gave for his work ethic, which by all accounts was an epic work ethic. And I actually quoted a number of his teammates. So I left with a very different impression on Roger Clemens than the one I went in with. And I think the feedback I've been getting from a lot of readers is that I humanized him because right now he has a bit of a reputation. Going back to the World Series against the Mets with the incident with Mike Piazza, not just in the series with the broken bat, but also with the beanball, that hit Piazza. And Rocket just explained it to me. He's like, it's like what Don Drysdale once told me. If there's not intimidation, you're not trying, and that's a part of the game. And Calvin Schiraldi, for all intents and purposes, had as good, if not better, stuff than Roger Clemens. And that's coming from the experts, from the scouts. But he didn't have that intimidation factor. He wasn't the type of the guy that was going to brush people back. And Schiraldi didn't have that, closer mentality, despite the fact just setting the world on fire with the second half that he had for the Red Sox, a 1.4 something ERA. But getting back to Clemens, I could not have been more impressed. He's dedicated his life to helping other people through charities or through natural disasters, just doing what he can. And so the guy's got a really big heart. So he was not at all what I expected, and I was very impressed.
Curious if you talked to him at all about Game 7. He had pitched very well in Game 6. I think he went 7 innings, if I'm not mistaken. And then there was the rainout that you mentioned earlier. So there was some talk that he'd be available maybe for a batter or two, maybe for an inning in Game 7. But John McNamara didn't go that way. He did not tab Clemens at any point. Did you talk about that?
Absolutely. He said he was ready to go. And, Bruce, today it's so prevalent in like a winner-take-all game, for an ace pitcher of a team, even on a day's rest, to have them come out of the bullpen and, give his team 2-3 innings. The most classic case, I think, was Bumgarner a few years ago.
Yeah.
And what he did. And then going back 20 years or so, during a championship series against Cleveland, Pedro Martinez, coming in on like a day's rest and throwing 5 or 6 just incredible innings. So Clemens was ready to go. Now, he was taken out of game 6, so the story goes, because he developed a blister. He didn't want out of that game either. And I think one of the things this book defined once and for all, because of an actual witness to the account, being Marty Barrett. Marty Barrett being right there with John McNamara and Roger Clemens while they were talking about the blister and whether or not Clemens should go back out there for the 8th inning with a lead. Clemens, he was ready to go. He was ready to go in Game 6 in the 8th inning, and he was ready to go certainly a couple of nights later in a Game 7. And I think McNamara had a bad series, made a lot of mistakes, and I think it cost the Red Sox an opportunity to win that World Series.
Was Clemens upset that he didn't pitch in Game 7, or was just simply a bit of frustration?
I think it was more frustration. The Red Sox ended up bringing in Schiraldi, and Schiraldi got hit hard. The Mets had started to see some of these pitchers multiple times, including Hurst, who pitched 5 shutout innings. And then it was the 6th inning where they really start to get to him. Mookie hit a ball hard for a hit. Mazzilli hit a ball hard. Keith Hernandez hit a ball hard. So when hitters see a pitcher again and again and again, even the great ones, like the Gibsons and the McLeans. It's, they're going to begin to time these guys. So the move would have been to bring in Clemens over a Schiraldi, I would think, and to bring in Al Nipper. Nipper did not have a good season at all.
Yeah.
His ERA was over 5. I think it was 5.36 or something like that. So to bring him in relief, again, a starting pitcher, he's not used to the role. He's having a really off season. There are just a lot of mistakes. If you have Roger Clemens out there that's willing to give you an inning or two in basically a tie game, and the game ended when Hurst left, it was 3-3. The game ended 8-5. So the Red Sox did put up a couple of runs, and they had a real rally going where they had runners in scoring position, nobody out, and the Red Sox couldn't get any more runs in one situation. So McNamara had a rough series. He should have utilized his ace pitcher more than he did, certainly.
We're going to talk more about McNamara in a few minutes. Final question on the Rocket. He has a number of sons that play ball. He's brought them through our Dreams Park here in Cooperstown. I remember one year he came through the museum, and I actually had a chance to meet him briefly. Isn't one of his sons playing in the minor leagues or scheduled to play in the minor leagues this year?
Yeah. I forget which one. All of his sons, he has four sons, and their first names all begin with the letter K.
Right.
And that's not a mistake. It's because, Clemens loves his strikeout symbols. And he's had at least 2 sons play professional ball at the minor league level, maybe even 3. When I interviewed him by phone, he was in Vancouver watching one of his sons play in the minors. So I would guess he's had at least 2, if not 3, sons play in the minor leagues.
That's amazing. Well, we have to talk, of course, about this man who unfortunately has really been treated as a tragic figure, despite the fact that he was an outstanding player for a very long time. Handled his miscue in Game 6, I thought, with tremendous dignity in public. Was willing to go on a comic television show, Curb Your Enthusiasm, in which the error that he made against the Mets was essentially parodied. But he also did emerge as the hero as he caught the child that had been thrown from the burning building in that episode. Yeah. The story of Bill Buckner is a fascinating one. You did the last really public extended interview with Bill Buckner before he passed away a couple of years ago. Tell us what it was like sitting down with him.
Well, I knew Bill for, I want to say, 8 years, something like that. I met him while I was working with Mookie Wilson on his autobiography. And of course, he and Mookie were great friends and business partners. There was a famous photo of Mookie running up the first baseline just at the very moment. There it is. The ball got by Buckner, and they must have signed 100,000 of those photos. And that might even be a conservative figure, because I know Buckner put all three of his kids through college, signing that photo, plus having a little extra. So he wanted to get something out of all the pain that he and his family endured. And when I mean family, not just him, but his children, his wife, and it was probably from only 1 or 2% of the Red Sox fans. He also received countless letters of thanks and encouragement for how he handles himself in public. But getting back to your question, I had known him for a while, and he knew that I was working on the book, and I knew he wasn't well. And I said to him, look, I know you're coming up to New York I think it was for one of his last signings. I think it was the second to last signing that he had ever done, and I believe the last one he had done in the New York area, and with Mookie. And so we met for lunch across the street from Citi Field, which is where he usually would stay when he was in New York. And in fact, I had a bite to eat with Mookie just before that. So he was definitely more frail than the previous time that I had seen him. I would say he had lost about 20, 25 pounds. And he was always one of these slow speakers where you would think he was done saying what he was going to say. So then you would start with your next question, or you would start talking, and then he would kind of start talking again. And so he was always kind of a slow talker, but it was more pronounced this time. But he seemingly at that time was on the mend. He told me he was doing better, and that his health had improved over previous months. But he certainly, wasn't the Bill Buckner that we remember, which was just a guy that gave all he had to the game, very much like a Pete Rose, and played most of his career working through injuries. Yeah. Coming to the ballpark at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon for a night game, so he could get bandaged up and then take his hitting and his fielding practice, come back in and get bandaged up all over again. And so when most players of his era were coming to the ballpark at 4:30 in the afternoon, he was there already for 4 hours. So his dedication to the game, 2,715 lifetime hits, a batting title, a higher fielding percentage than Lou Gehrig, and sadly, he is remembered most for that error that he made in Game 6, which, Mookie swears he would have beaten it out. And as you can see in the picture that you have up on the screen, Stanley was late getting to the bag as well. So I think he would have had first and third of a tie game. But, that play should never have happened. The Red Sox had a pickoff play on, which, and this is revealed in the book for the first time that I've ever seen it in print. Barrett had a pickoff play on at second base. Ray Knight, after the Red Sox had tied the game on the wild pitch, he's dancing off of second base. He's like 30 feet off second base. And he was not a base stealer or a particularly, renowned base runner. And so Barrett notices this. He shades over towards second for a pickoff play. Buckner has to shade over towards Barrett's position to cover some of his ground, and he's already hobbling. And Stanley either misses the pickoff sign or he chooses to concentrate on the hitter instead. So if they pick off Ray Knight, the Buckner play never happens. And when you think for a moment how that would have changed the lives of people like Buckner, of Bob Stanley, of Rich Gedman, John McNamara, it's incredible. If that it's interesting how that one moment in time changed the lives and careers of a number of baseball men.
Let's talk a little bit more about that play. You mentioned that Mookie, who was very fast still at this stage of his career, felt that he would have beat the play to first. Did Buckner give an opinion on that? Did he think he would have been able to make it there if he'd fielded it cleanly?
He really wasn't sure. He told me, Mookie could fly. And he said it would have been extremely close. But, the other thing, Bruce, is that Dave Stapleton was used as a defensive replacement for pretty much the second half of that season for Buckner throughout the American League Championship Series and in part of the World Series. But once the Red Sox took that 2-run lead in the 10th inning, Mcnamara made the call, and he's like, well, 2-run lead, I'm going to put Buckner out there, and so he can be one of the conquering heroes and celebrate with his teammates on the field. And, it turned out to be a colossal mistake, because you have to think that Stapleton, a healthy Stapleton, probably would have played that ball a lot cleaner, and maybe would have been able to handle the ball himself. There was just such a list of things that went wrong at the very end, both physically and mentally and strategically, that to blame it on Buckner is absolutely ludicrous.
Knowing what I know about Bill Buckner, he was such a tough, gritty player. I can't imagine that he would have wanted to come out of the game, that his preference would have been to stay in the game, even though he knew he was not anywhere near 100%.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. And we talked about that in the book. And he said, with all due respect to Stapleton, he wasn't a Gold Glover out there, and he truly didn't mean any disrespect to Stapleton. But Buckner just felt that he was more steady and would be more up to the big moment, is what I got from Buckner. So he wanted to be out there, and I think he was glad he was out there. There was talk in the dugout between Mcnamara and Buckner about whether or not he would be in the game to close it out. And Buckner wanted to be out there. So you can't completely pin that one on Mcnamara, though he was the manager and it was his call to make, and he didn't make it. And you have to think in hindsight, Stapleton really should have been out there. But it's easy to say now, of course.
Yeah. Erik, would you say that by the end of his life, Buckner was at peace with the play and what happened?
He still had his scars. Publicly, he would make it believed that he was over it. Like you said earlier, he did the Curb Your Enthusiasm episode kind of, in a self-deprecating way. And but no, I don't think he did get over the scrutiny because he pretty much told me that the scars hadn't gone away. Yeah. And that's one of the most revealing things in the chapter that I had with him, or that I wrote about him, that he didn't get over it, that he had that scar. And he was just very hurt when he returned to Fenway for the first time. And, he threw out the first pitch, which he threw it to Dwight Evans. And it was after the Red Sox won their second World Championship of the millennium. So it would have been for opening day of 2008. But despite how touched he was by the standing ovation that he got and the emotion that he showed out on the mound with Dwight Evans, he was emotional. He was weeping.
Yeah.
And just overtaken with emotion that day. There were signs at the ballpark that read basically, we forgive you now, Buck, and Buckner's like, you forgive me. No, I forgive you. Yeah. And those banners really bothered him a lot. And then there was always the occasional, signing, or if he was at a minor league park and, somebody would make some snide remark, like a little boy was asking for his autograph on a baseball, and some 18-year-old, I think it was, said, hey, you better be careful, he might drop the ball. Stuff like that. And there was a traffic incident when someone recognized him and made some snide remark, and Buckner chased him in his, as the guy's driving away. So there were incidents like that throughout his life after that World Series. And, he was such a prideful man that those types of things really bothered him. And no, he never got over it completely.
Mm. Well, if he and his family could take any consolation, I think it's the true baseball fans, the fans that followed his entire career, really knew about his body of work, and realized that this was really a hero of the game, and not so much the GOAT as he was made out to be. And hopefully Bill Buckner was able to sense that from at least some of the fans out there. He certainly deserved better than what he got in many instances. We're going to take some questions from the audience in a moment, but I do want to talk a little bit about John McNamara. You did not interview him for the book. He passed away last year, lived to a fairly old age. Really was an accomplished manager. He was sub 500 for his career, but a lot of that was because he managed some just horrible Padres teams in the mid 1970s. I think he was with them for about 4 seasons, and that really skewed his record. He had success with Cincinnati. He had success in Boston. He was a respected baseball man, but it essentially came down to he had that one bad series at the wrong time.
He did, and you're exactly right. He was very well respected by some of the greats of the game, like Reggie Jackson, when he was a coach in Oakland, Tom Seaver, whom McNamara managed both in Cincinnati and then later in Boston, of course. And he seemed like, to me, a veteran's manager. He had his favorites, and when he wanted to make a point, if there was a losing streak, and if he had one of those, knock over the lunch table kind of meetings, he would take it out on the younger guys. On this Red Sox team, it would be like someone like Steve Lyons. Whereas, the veteran players really adored McNamara and really respected him because he was a career baseball man. But, he had this side of him by the time he was a Red Sox manager, and kind of, a little crotchety, just moody a little bit by that point in his career. He wasn't going to take any guff, but he definitely had the respect of the players. Somebody asked me the other day in another interview, was McNamara beloved? No, he wasn't. But he was well respected. So, much like Bob Stanley, who, if you look at his lifetime statistics, were very good. And by the way, a relief pitcher whom Ted Williams once called the best in the game over a 2-year period back in the early 80s, in an era where you had Suter and Gossage, because Stanley could spot start. He could come in and give you 5 innings out of the bullpen. He could close the game, and his numbers were really great. And, we talked about Buckner, and, you had guys like McNamara, Stanley, and Buckner who had otherwise, really great careers. But they, because of one game or a couple of games, their reputations really took a hit, and undeservedly so.
Yeah. From our audience, we have some comments from Perry Barber, who is a professional umpire. In fact, Erik, she was a guest with us a few weeks back talking about her own career. Perry tunes into a lot of our programs, and I want to thank Perry for giving us updates on the Clemens children. Perry points out that Kobe Clemens, the oldest son, is coaching in the Astros organization. Wow. Casey Clemens, also with a K, played independent ball last year and might be in the Blue Jay minor league system this year. Minor league season has not yet started. AAA will be starting the first week in May, and then a little bit later will be the lower minor leagues. And then Perry also points out that Corey Clemens is a professional chef. So I was not aware of that at all. So I thank Perry for that information. Very much appreciated. Now, speaking of Bob Stanley, we do have a question from Terry in Virginia. And I'm not sure if this person's male or female. He or she is asking simply a question: wild pitch or pass ball, referring to the Bob Stanley pitch that eluded Rich Gedman. It was officially recorded as a wild pitch. I thought it was a pass ball. Your thoughts, Erik?
Well, I, I've asked Gedman this, I've asked Stanley this, and they're like, well, it doesn't really make a difference. To me, it looked like, even though the ball glanced off of Gedman's glove, which almost always means that it's going to be a pass ball, the ball came in so far to Mookie that, it was really nowhere near Gedman, where Gedman was looking for the pitch.
Yeah.
Which is why here we are 35 years later, and we're still talking about whether this is a wild pitch or a pass ball. To me, I think if it goes off his glove, it's a pass ball, but I can't say it really looked like Gedman was setting up, middle towards the outside, Mookie was hitting left-handed.
Yep.
And, the pitch almost hit Mookie. So it was so far inside. So it's just one of those classic cases where whether it was called a wild pitch or pass ball, you're right and you're wrong.
Yeah, that was a tough call, no question. One thing we didn't talk about was you did a chapter with Oil Can Boyd, who you found to be very insightful, very entertaining. Did you talk at all about the alleged incident where supposedly Lenny Dykstra taunted him? This has been alleged by Ron Darley in his book. Dykstra has denied it. Did you talk to Oil Can about that at all?
No, I didn't. And the reason I didn't was because I met with the Can just before that became public. Boy, I sure would have asked him, though. Yeah. Now, that being said, I've maintained, pretty good, actually a very good relationship with Kevin Mitchell. In fact, we chat from time to time, and Kevin Mitchell is one of the most misunderstood people I know, whether in baseball or outside of baseball. Just a kind soul. Who was really given a bad rap because he was on the '86 Mets with the Scum Bunch and all that. And after that came out, he said, boy, I don't know what Ronnie's talking about. Mitchell didn't hear Lenny say anything. Strawberry didn't hear anything. Dwight Gooden didn't hear anything. Now, obviously, there's a thread here. These are all African-American players whose heads would have absolutely exploded if they heard Lenny yelling out what he was accused of in Ron Darling's book.
Yeah.
So whether or not, Lenny, of course, denies it. Whether Lenny said it or not, I don't know for sure. Ronnie, of course, has an outstanding reputation in baseball. So for him to put it in a book, you have to wonder, well, maybe Lenny did say those things, but then again, the Red Sox dugout, I've been in that visiting dugout. It's really small and it's right next to the on-deck circle. And I think if Lenny's shouting stuff out to Oil Can, you would think that someone would have heard him say it, unless unless somebody did hear him say it and they're covering up for him. But no, so I didn't ask Oil Can because it wasn't public yet.
Certainly, bench jockeying did exist back in the 1980s. Questionable, though, whether you would have had openly racist bench jockeying, as was alleged. So the mystery will continue. But no mystery as to this book, Two Sides of Glory. It is a book about the 1986 Boston Red Sox in their own words. Interviews with many of the players, including Hall of Famers like Jim Rice, It's drawn terrific reviews. Erik, where can people purchase the book if they'd like to get a copy?
Well, they can purchase the book wherever books are sold. These are challenging times, so I tell people, support your local and your independent bookstores who have really felt the brunt of this COVID life that we're in now. Bookends has been a friend to me for many years. They're in Ridgewood, New Jersey. So that's Bookends. So it's book-ends.com if you want to support them. I know that they would appreciate it. But wherever books are sold, if you're Amazon Prime, you can go that route too. But you can find it, that's for sure.
Yeah. Do you have your own website too?
I do. My website is erikshermanbaseball.com. It's Erik with a K. erikshermanbaseball.com. You can find me on Twitter @by Erik Sherman. And you can find me on YouTube, Erik Sherman Baseball, Facebook, Erik Sherman Baseball. So I can't get away. I'm easy to find.
Again, the website, erikshermanbaseball.com, and that's Erik with a K, not a C. And then the other website that Erik mentioned, book-ends.com. As always, it's been fun, Erik. We do appreciate your time. Thanks for being with us, and best of luck with the book. I hope that you'll be able to get out to some bookstores and do some signings later in the summer.
Me too, Bruce. I'd love nothing more. And again, I can't thank you enough for having me back, and for what you're doing with this virtual author series. It's so important to all of us who love the game.
Thank you, Erik. We thank you for your time over this past hour. We also want to thank, of course, the Ford Motor Company for their generous support of programs like the Virtual Author Series. Thanks to them as well. Thanks to all of our viewers out there. We hope you enjoyed the program. Have a great day, everybody.